This is the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, and carved across one of its walls is a king presenting his captives to the gods. Look closely at the prisoners. They wear strange feathered headdresses, nothing like anything Egyptian. These were the people who helped bring the great empires of the Bronze Age crashing down, recorded in stone by the one king who beat them back. And yet we cannot say with any confidence who they were or where they went afterward. That is the problem at the center of this story. An enemy this consequential should have left a clear trail behind it. It did not. I came across the Sea Peoples while researching the Bronze Age collapse, and I could not let them go, because their names refused to connect to any single homeland on Earth. Recent ancient DNA work has finally entered the record. What it revealed was not what anyone expected. Before we ask who these people were, it is worth understanding exactly what they brought down, because the scale of it is staggering. For nearly 2,000 years, the Eastern Mediterranean had been building something the world had never seen. It began around 3,300 years before the Common Era, and across those centuries it gave rise to writing, to crowded cities, to monuments so vast that some of them still stand on the skyline today. By the late Bronze Age, this was a world of superpowers, not scattered villages, empires. There was Egypt, ancient even by the standards of the ancient world, ruling its heartland along the Nile and holding a string of vassal states across Canaan. There was the Hittite Empire to the north, a great power centered in Anatolia, with wealthy Syrian vassals at cities like Ugarit and Carchemish. There was Assyria, rising in the east. These were not isolated kingdoms minding their own affairs. They were stitched together. Royal courts wrote letters to one another. Merchant ships carried copper and tin and grain and luxury goods from one end of the sea to the other. A king in one capital knew the name of a king 1,000 miles away. It was, in its own bronze and clay fashion, a connected world. And then, in around 1175 BCE, it fell apart. We have a name for it now: the Bronze Age collapse. It was not a single event on a single afternoon. It was a system coming undone. Long-distance trade, the lifeblood of the whole arrangement, imploded. The great cities were abandoned, some of them never reoccupied. The political institutions that had held everything together simply fragmented and dissolved. Within the span of a few generations, a civilization that had taken 2,000 years to build was gutted. And in the middle of all that turmoil, the reports began. From the Hittite heartland in the north all the way down to the marshy coast of the Egyptian delta, the same kind of account kept surfacing. Invaders, coming by land and by sea, destroying cities, overthrowing kings, moving through a world that was already on its knees. These are the people we now call the Sea Peoples. And the temptation, the one that historians gave into for more than a century, is to read these two facts as a single sentence. The empires fell. The invaders came. Therefore, the invaders felled the empires. But hold that thought, because it is exactly the kind of clean answer this story refuses to give. Here is the detail worth carrying forward into everything that follows. The Sea Peoples did not descend on a thriving world and shatter it. They arrived into a world that was already breaking, already starving, already coming apart at the seams. That single fact is going to matter enormously, because when the DNA finally speaks, it will tell us they were not only the cause of the collapse, they were also its children. The first real clue to who these people were did not come from a tomb or a battlefield. It came from a list of names. When the Egyptian scribes recorded the Great Invasion, they did not write about a single enemy. They named a confederation: the Peliset, the Checker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Washesh, and in earlier records, more names still, the Luca, the Sheridan, the Teresh, the Ekwesh, a roll call of peoples who had united their hearts, as one inscription puts it, and come forward together against the established world. And right away, the name we have given them starts to fall apart in our hands. We call them the Sea Peoples, but only some of them are ever described as coming from the sea or from islands. The rest are simply there in the list, lumped in. The truth is that almost every scholar who works on this subject uses the name reluctantly, sometimes only in quotation marks, because it was stamped onto all these groups at once by modern historians, not by the people themselves. It is a label of convenience hiding a great deal of confusion, and they did not appear out of nowhere. This is the part that deepens the puzzle rather than solving it. Some of these names turn up in Egyptian records more than a century before the Great Invasion, not as enemies at all, but as hired men. As mercenaries serving in the armies of the very empires they would later help bring down. The Egyptians and the Hittites had employed them, paid them, trusted them with their borders. These were not strangers from beyond the edge of the map. They were already inside the system before they ever turned against it. So where did they actually come from? And here the trail does not just go cold. It splinters in every direction at once. The theories have never stopped multiplying. The Luca are placed fairly confidently in southwestern Anatolia, but after that it becomes guesswork dressed up as geography. The Sheridan, some argue, came from Sardinia because the consonants in the two names line up. The Shekelesh from Sicily, on the same kind of linguistic hunch. The Teresh and the Ekwesh from somewhere around Greece. Every one of these claims rests on the faint echo of one word sounding like another, and the archaeology, the actual physical evidence pulled out of the ground, does not back almost any of it up. There is even a possibility that turns the whole exercise inside out. What if these peoples did not come from those distant islands at all, but only ended up there afterward, scattered and resettled after their defeat? In which case we would be reading the wreckage of their ending and mistaking it for their beginning. We have their names. We do not have their origins. The list that should have pointed us home points everywhere and nowhere. And the one thing that might finally settle it was never carved on any wall. It was buried in the bones. Before the bones can speak, follow what these people actually did. Because the shape of the attack tells us something the names alone never could. This was not one campaign. It was not a single army marching to a single war. It unfolded over roughly 2 decades, a long grinding wave of destruction rolling across the eastern Mediterranean. It began in the north, along the coast of Anatolia, and then it pushed inland toward the heart of the Hittite Empire. Around 1200 BCE, or shortly after, the great capital of Hattusa burned. The royal fortress, the administrative buildings, all of it put to the torch. And the Hittite Empire, already weakened by food shortages and unstable leadership, did not recover. It simply dissolved. Its vassal states tasted a few years of freedom, and then they too were swept away. The wave kept moving. It hammered Cyprus, then Syria, then Canaan, striking city after city along the southern Anatolian coast. And here, by an extraordinary stroke of archaeological luck, we get to hear the voices of the people watching it come. In the final years before their cities fell, the kingdoms of Ugarit and Cyprus exchanged letters. Panicked, urgent letters, preserved in clay. The king of Ugarit, a man named Amurapi, seems to have been among the first to see the enemy fleet on the water, and he sent word across the sea asking for help. The reply that came back was practical and grim. Enemy ships have been sighted, the Cypriot king wrote. If it is true, then make yourself strong. Wall your cities. Bring your infantry and your chariots inside them. Be on the lookout. Make yourself very strong. But the advice arrived too late. And Amurapi's answer is one of the most haunting things to survive from the entire ancient world. "The enemy ships have already come," he writes back. "They have set fire to my cities and done harm to my land." And then the detail that explains everything. "Does my father not know," he asks, "that all my own infantry and chariots are stationed away in Hatti, and all my ships are away in the land of Luca? They have not returned. The land is left defenseless." Read that again. His armies were gone, posted to other fronts that may already have fallen. His navy was away in Luca, the homeland of one of the very groups now attacking him. The defenders had been pulled apart and scattered before the blow ever landed. A final letter warned that 20 enemy ships had slipped away into the mountains and vanished, no one knew where, and then the correspondence simply stops. Ugarit fell. The clay tablets were found in the ash of its destruction, some of them still in the kiln, never even delivered. This is why the Sea Peoples feel so close to us. We can hear the fear in their victims' own words, and it is also why they remain so maddeningly far away. We have the terror they caused. We still do not have their faces. And so the wave came south, toward the last great power still standing, toward Egypt. And here we return to where we began, to the temple walls of Ramesses III. By around 1176 BCE, the Sea Peoples had reached the edge of the Egyptian world, and this time they did not come as raiders testing a coastline. They came as a force intent on breaking through. Ramses met them with a plan. On land, the Egyptian army engaged them near Ashkelon, a Canaanite city that had already been reduced to ruin. And along the coast of the Sinai, the king placed a naval force, a blockade meant to pin the enemy against the shore and cut off any escape by sea. He was not simply trying to repel them, he was trying to trap them. The temple records both halves of the fight, the land battle and then the naval battle, carved across the outer wall in astonishing detail. You can see the enemy ships capsized in the water, the warriors with their distinctive feathered headgear thrown overboard and drowning, the Egyptian archers raining arrows down from their own decks. The inscription beside it does not bother with modesty. The northern countries were quivering in their bodies, it says. His Majesty went forth against them like a whirlwind. The terror of him entered into their bodies. They are capsized and overwhelmed where they stand. Many historians believe these two battles happened at nearly the same time, either in quick succession or as one long continuous struggle spread across days. The order hardly matters. What matters is the result. The Sea Peoples were defeated, and the temple makes sure you understand the scale of it. The artwork shows captives marched forward to be displayed before the king, bound and broken. And beside them, piled in heaps, the severed hands of the slain, counted out one by one as a tally of the dead. This was a victory meant to be remembered for 3,000 years. But look at what the stone actually records. It tells us that Ramses fought them. It tells us that he beat them. It tells us how they were dressed, how their ships looked, how many of them died on that beach. The Egyptians were meticulous. They carved the whole thing in granite so that no one would ever forget what their king had done. And yet, for all of it, the stone, is silent on the only question that has driven this entire story. It does not tell us where these people came from. It does not tell us where the survivors went. The Egyptians recorded their enemy in the moment of defeat and then let them dissolve back into the haze of history, unnamed in any deeper sense, untraced. We have the most detailed account of their ending ever produced, and it leaves us knowing almost nothing about them at all. To answer that, you cannot read the inscriptions. You have to read the genome. Reading the genome of the Sea Peoples is harder than it sounds, and for most of them, it remains impossible. The bones are still silent. For the Shekelesh, the Teresh, the Denyen, the Weshesh, we have names on a wall and almost nothing else. No skeletons we can confidently call theirs, no genetic signal, nothing to anchor them to a homeland. And there is that unsettling possibility we raised earlier, that some of them only reached the distant islands bearing their names after the defeat scattered them, the Sheridan ending up in Sardinia rather than ever having sailed from it. For most of the Confederation, the trail is still cold, but one group cracked open, and it changed how we read all the rest. The Peliset, the people the Hebrew Bible would come to call the Philistines, are the exception to the silence. After the great battles, they settled in southern Canaan, in a cluster of cities whose names survive: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gaza, Gath, Ekron. And because they stayed, because they built and buried their dead in one place for generations, they left behind something the others did not. They left evidence in the ground. The first clues were not genetic at all. They were ceramic. Archaeologists digging at Philistine cities pulled out pottery in a style that did not belong to Canaan. It belonged to the Aegean, to the world of Mycenaean Greece, decorated in the same forms found on islands hundreds of miles to the west. And crucially, this pottery was made locally, produced right there in Canaan by potters who had carried their craft with them. Then came the religious figurines, small clay images echoing Aegean shapes rather than Canaanite ones. Migrants, it seemed, bringing their gods and their workshops along with their families. And then, in 2019, came the slam dunk. Geneticists recovered ancient DNA from Philistine skeletons, and the markers pointed across the sea to southern Europe and the Aegean. The pottery had not lied. These people had roots on the far side of the Mediterranean. But here is the part that quietly rearranges the whole story. The DNA did not reveal a pure migrating tribe that swept in and stayed itself. It revealed a fusion. The Aegean signal was real, but within just a generation or two, it was already blending into the local Canaanite population, marrying into it, dissolving into it. The newcomers did not replace the people they found. They merged with them. And that single finding reaches back and explains every loose thread we left hanging. It explains why their names point everywhere and nowhere at once. It explains why the archaeology never cleanly matched the homelands. It explains why these were never armies but migrations, with women and children and livestock in tow. The Sea Peoples were not one people who came from one place. They were many peoples, mixing as they moved. The question we had been asking all along, where did they come from, was the wrong question. The answer was never a single place. It was a process of mixing. If the Sea Peoples did not arrive from one place, then their vanishing demands a different explanation too. Because a people assembled from many streams does not simply disappear. So where did they go? Start by throwing out the oldest story, the one that ruled for more than a century. In that version, the Sea Peoples were the villains of the Bronze Age, marauders who came out of the West, shattered the great empires, and dragged the world down into a dark age. It is a dramatic story. It is also almost certainly wrong. Kingdoms, and especially several kingdoms at once, do not collapse because of a single cause. By the time the Egyptians first clashed with these invaders, the world was already coming undone. The Mycenaean civilization in Greece was in decline. The Hittites were reeling from plague, from drought, from failing harvests and unrest in their own court. Egypt and Assyria were straining under their own troubles. The Sea Peoples did not arrive on a thriving world. They arrived on a slow-motion train wreck that was already underway. And this is where the archaeologist Eric Klein offers the line that holds the whole story together. The Sea Peoples, he argues, probably began as waves of migrants and refugees fleeing the collapse, not causing it. And by the time they reached Ramses in the 1170s, they were a mixed bag, having picked up survivors from the falling Mycenaean, Minoan, and Hittite cities along the way. They were not only the destroyers of that world, they were its refugees, as much its victims as its oppressors, scapegoated by later historians who were dazzled by the dramatic Egyptian propaganda and took the conqueror at his word. And the Philistines show us what vanishing actually meant, because they did not vanish through extermination. Ramses carved his victory in stone, but the Peliset did not die on that beach. They settled. They built their cities. And then, exactly as the DNA shows, they began to dissolve, their Aegean blood merging into the Canaanite population around them, generation after generation, until the distinct people who had arrived simply became indistinguishable from their neighbors. Within a few centuries, the Philistines were gone, not killed, but absorbed. And here's the thing worth noticing. That dissolving was the same process that made them in the first place, only now running in reverse. They were born from peoples mixing as they fled. They ended by mixing into the lands they had attacked. The fusion that assembled them never stopped. It simply kept going until there was nothing distinct left to point to. That is why they were always going to be impossible to trace. A coalition stitched together from fragments of a collapsing world was, in the end, always going to come apart back into fragments. They did not march off the edge of history. They settled into it, married into it, and disappeared into the bloodlines of the very region they had terrorized. The empire that beat them is gone too. The people inside the Sea Peoples never really left. Here is the thing that stays with me after weeks inside this material. The Sea Peoples are almost always told as a story of mysterious raiders who came from nowhere and vanished into nothing, leaving only burning cities behind them. The DNA tells a different story. It tells of people who were never one people at all, but a fusion of refugees, migrants, and survivors, which is exactly why the question of where they came from never had a clean answer. It tells of an enemy that did not so much die as dissolve into the very lands it had attacked. The Egyptians carved their victory in stone and believed that was the ending. It was not. The empires fell, the coalition scattered, but the people inside it were absorbed, carried forward in the ancestry of the Eastern Mediterranean. They vanished as a name. The thread never broke.